Okay, take it away, Lakeisha.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lakeisha Vaughn, and I work with the Department of Housing and Community Development here in the state of Maryland. And I'm going to be introducing our guest this morning, Mr. Keith Murky, who comes to us to speak on fair housing. Mr. Murky comes as the Education and Outreach Associate at the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. And just a few housekeeping things. We're going to take all questions at the end of the session, and we're going to be utilizing the chat box. So we'll be monitoring the chat. Thank you so much, Keith. Take it away.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So welcome, everybody, and I look forward to our session. I'm going to be talking about diversity issues and housing. And so it focuses a lot on diversity, but also how it may impact our concepts about a bias, and especially in some of the illustrations and how it happens in housing. So I want us to go ahead and get started. I need to be able to share, won't let me share. So it's been disabled.
Okay, let me go ahead and make you a co-host. That should give you the ability to do that.
I think there we go.
Okay.
I see it. So let me move something out of the way for this. I love these little things that I have to keep moving.
Yeah, it's always
you have
like
to move
that.
those little things around your page so you can see. So can everybody see that?
I can see it, yeah.
And does it move?
Yeah.
Good. Hallelujah. That's what I say all the time when it comes to this, because with computers sometimes, and with programs, sometimes they decide they don't want to work. So we're going to be talking about the dimensions of diversity and the impact on housing services. And I think this is something that dimensions of diversity issues can actually be used in lots of parts of our life, but we're seeing issues like in housing and stuff where this concepts of heterogeneity, where we want, for centuries, we've kind of lumped people together. That's where we created the words even for ghetto, for segregation, all of those, because we're lumping people together in their housing and making assumptions about what they need and what they don't need. So tell you a little bit about what we do real quick, and I'll talk about a new part of the law that's come into play in the last year under housing. So we're the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, and this is my information here. I'll make sure that you all have a copy of this if you so wish. We enforce as an agency 3 parts of our state law. We enforce Title 20, which is our basic harassment anti-discrimination code for the state. Title 19 is state finance and procurement article, which deals with any subcontract to the state. So if you're a private industry or agency, company, business that subcontracts with a state agency, you fall under protection of us under this title. And one of the newest came in, they've added to our arena, and that means protections under healthcare. So general healthcare article number 2. And that will deal, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. It's basically that you are protected in the area of seeking healthcare, in the services, in the facilities, and access and interaction with licensed health professionals within the state of Maryland. So we are co-facilitators with the state health department. So they will do the investigation, but we are co-enforcers of the issue. So our mission is really very simple. Through our enforcement of these laws, we want to prevent discrimination, harassment, and employment, public accommodations, housing, healthcare, and commercial non-discrimination, which are the subcontracts. We also, to do this, we provide educational and outreach services that are related to it. So we let people know what the laws are. As you know, with most things around law, as you know, in housing, for example, there are so many bits and pieces around housing that you can't know everything. It's the same. I know we've been told, you know, ignorance of the law is no excuse. So if you say, well, I didn't know that was illegal, doesn't make any difference. But there are so many laws that we are on, that we all live under. And so these are the ones that we focus on specifically. We want to promote and improve civil rights in Maryland. So our vision is to have a state that's free from any trace of unlawful discrimination. I believe this is a wonderful vision, but the reality is we have humans that live and work with us. And in that, people don't always make decisions based on fact or even based on legality. They base it on feeling or perception. And that's the issues around diversity. We make these broad assumptions about groups. And so that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. So as I said, these are our areas. I'm going to do this real quick. Employment covers everything from advertising, interview questions, how you're treated at work, benefits, all the way through when you leave or decide to leave. It covers the entire gamut. It also includes even after you've left sometimes, depending on what's happened. Like if you quit because someone's doing something to you, you're still, even though you're no longer employed by them, you're still protected by our law. Housing, as many of you, I'm sure know a lot more about housing, is that we cover everything from things like advertising, brokering services, marketing, any kind of real estate services, mortgaging services, anything like that would fall under our purview if it's done in an illegal manner. Public accommodations are access to services and facilities. If it's noted that it's open to the public, it has to be open to everybody. So we know the basic ones. We've always thought these: hotels, motels, restaurants, stores, but we also include sidewalks. We include parking lots. We include government buildings, pools, anything that it says it's open. What's not public accommodations are things that are private. So if you are a member of a private club, you're not considered a public accommodation. This only falls under us. It's interesting under of the top three, so employment, housing, and public accommodations. Of course, employment gets most of our complaints, but they're the kind of complaints we get around employment tend to be around race, sex, sometimes national origin or religion, depending on what's going on in the world, disability. And for housing and public accommodations, disability has been our top ones for the longest time. The other thing that tops employment, that has also been topping employment for the federal government, EEOC, is retaliation. So when people retaliate against a person for filing a complaint, that has been the highest for, I think, EEOC for the last 10 years plus, and ours have been the last couple. We're seeing that as a retaliation as a top way that things happen to people, which with retaliation, it can put a damper on people filing a complaint if there's an issue, or even participating in an investigation. They're dampened by that. So it is very important for us to make sure that people do have protections. And what I've realized in having conversations with people is that you don't realize you have protections until you need it. I've told people, I've given them a list of what are protected class, and they're like, I didn't know that was illegal, or I thought that was always protected. And you're like, no, not always. So it's an interesting kind of the misinformation as well as the non-knowledge of a person's every day. They don't know what's protecting them or not and what they should put up with. My first job after graduate school, I had a supervisor that threw a chair at me because I didn't work a computer fast enough. I didn't know that was kind of illegal. I thought he just got mad and that happened. He did get fired for that, but I didn't know. I didn't know to report. No one ever told me that. So it's realizing that sometimes it's up to us, and it's up to you if you're a housing professional to be able to be aware of this, so that one is that you're not breaking the law, or number two, that if other people are doing it, you need to make sure they know that. We've had cases where real estate agents have been the ones that let us know something's going on. For example, someone said, I don't want you to rent to whatever group. And you say, yeah, you can't use that as a criteria. And people don't know that. So I'm going to look specifically at housing. So I wanted to cover this specifically, and I'm sure you already know these, but I want to talk about our new one. So of course, race, as well as other attachments to race, like family members that may be of a different racial grouping, your friends that may be of a different grouping when it comes to housing, if people are treating you differently because you have friends of a different race that come over, those kind of things. Sex, which also includes gender discrimination and sexual harassment, because we're seeing sexual harassment in housing as well as employment. Employment's always been a little bit top, but housing, sexual harassment has been still there and present. Big case was with the Housing Authority in Baltimore City, where repair workers, housing maintenance people were saying to especially single women that I will fix that if you do this for me, and kind of trapping them in this cycle. National origin could also include your dialect of your language or your accent, but also could include your last name. People do make, when we talk about diversity, looking at our last names, people make assumptions about our last names, where we're from, where our family is from, where our ancestors came from, and not really knowing what it is. Religion is your practice of religion as well as your non-practice, so it's the gamut of spirituality. It's your color, is your hue of your skin. Sexual orientation is who you fall in love with. It's your attraction, both romantically and sexually attracted to. So whether that's male to male, male to female, female to female, or what some people refer, it used to be the old term is bisexual, but more like pansexual, omnisexual. And then there are persons who are non-binary, who do not claim, who do not lay claim really when we talk about gender identity as to male or female. Disability, which is mental and physical. So mental will include learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, as well as mental illness. And physical, sight, mobility, hearing. It includes even cognitive and behavioral disabilities, pregnancy, medical conditions, anything like that. Marital status, married, single, widowed, divorced. We get questions a lot about, I don't want to rent to two people that aren't married. And so that has come up once in a while, not a lot. So that was a way of preventing, for example, same-sex couples from renting a place even because of that. Gender identity is our concepts about ourselves as to male or female, including non-binary. So that whether you see yourself, and the thing with gender identity and sexual orientation, it's really from where we stand. It's our individual identity, our individual orientation. It's not about what people place on us. And our state law says about gender identity, it is held as a core part, it's a sincere belief as a part of our core identity. And it's regardless of the gender we were identified at birth or assigned at birth. Doesn't matter that. It's what you yourself assign yourself as gender identity. Of course, familial status was added and so therefore age is removed as a protected class, even though they do have their own separate categories of 55 and older, 62 and older housing. But we have familial status, which is the presence of children. And the newest one, and I'm sure you've heard something about this, and that's the source of income law. And so what I'm going to go over a little bit, just a couple slides about what that means. And just kind of a little bit more clarification. And since it's not all about that, I just wanted to kind of include it for you. So the source of income, it is any lawful source of money paid directly or indirectly to or on behalf of the renter or buyer of housing. So it has to be a lawful source. That's the big key. Lawful source. And that income can come from a profession or job. It can be any government or private assistance, grant, loan, low income housing assistance voucher certificates. It can be a gift, an inheritance, a pension, annuity, alimony, child support, any of those kind of monetary considerations of benefit, or even the sale or pledge of a property or interest in a property. So if for example, your family is renting out your family home and each of your siblings is getting a cut of that, that's considered lawful source of income. So if you're each receiving $500 a month or $400 a month because you're splitting up that cost, then that's still considered a lawful source of income. Now, there are exemptions, of course, owner occupied and owner of 5 units or less. Those, as with other exemptions, we see this. So under owner occupied or owner of 5 units or less, you're exempt from some of these. So if you're renting or sale of a single family dwelling, you are exempt if it's sold without any kind of sales or rental facilities or services. So any of those, real estate broker, agent, person that's usually in the business of selling or renting buildings, or an agent. So you're exempt if you're doing it on your own. However, if you publish, post, or mail anything like an advertisement or written notice that violates the subtitle, so if you post that you are only going to rent to single white Christian females, that is a different, that is a violation. So if you don't post and you don't post anything illegal, and you own the single family dwelling and you're renting and selling it as one, you have exemptions. The prohibition against the discrimination does not include, so in prohibiting someone from determining the ability to pay, buy, or rent, or pay that purchase price or pay the rent. So if you do that through a reasonable manner, through non-discriminating way of finding out, what is the amount of income, credit worthiness, that you're not exempt from doing that. That is what you are allowed to do. The exemption does not prevent you from refusing to consider income that comes from criminal activity. That's what we hear most when someone says, what if someone's a drug dealer? Well, you don't have to consider that income from a drug deal. That's an illegal source of income. It has to be a legal source of income. And the same thing for any kind of mortgage lending is you determining with applicable federal and state laws the ability for a person to pay back a mortgage loan. So if you're using ways to find out if someone has the ability to pay or repay a mortgage or be able to pay rent, that's legal. It's when we start exempting, when we start prohibiting people by the group they fall in, like all those protected classes I said, all those other classes, we prevent them, that becomes an issue. Or if you use any services because they're under a different, they will be held to a different standard. So those are the exemptions. And that's pretty much it when it comes to source of income. I know there was a lot of pushback and everything, especially I think it deals with more like, it deals with our concept, and we're talking about diversity, our concepts of poverty, our concepts of places where people live and where they should live or can live, and therefore what kind of housing do they deserve or can deserve, all of that stuff. And that's where the exemption was, or their beliefs about people that receive assistance. So many misconceptions about that, like depending on where you live, your concept of people that receive assistance is a specific group. They look a certain way, they do certain things. And we, once again, if one person does something, like I would hear my brother saying things like, well, everybody on assistance, they seem to be able to afford a computer. And I would say, well, they may be getting assistance with housing, but they also, that computer may have been given to them. And they may need that for the job, the partial job they're doing, or they have to be able to have connection to family, or they have to have medical connections. So where it's like apples and oranges. And people say, well, what about if they have a car? It might be that if they're working a part-time job, they'll be able to get there, get family to the store, get family to medical doctors. So there's a lot of stuff we start making assumptions and guessing about why people get what they have and deserve what they have. And, but yet if it happens to us, we think very differently. So my contact information, that's what I kind of like my commercial. We'll do our little commercial. So then we're going to really kind of talk about the dimensions of diversity and the impact on housing services. Diversity is really not about how we differ. It's how we embrace one another's uniqueness. And I like the reason I like this quote because it takes diversity from being a noun. So diversity is how we differ. It's an object. To being a verb. It's how we embrace one another's uniqueness. It's how we embrace adding different people into our life, how we embrace adding new people into our neighborhoods, how we embrace adding new people into our larger community. It's recognizing that our communities have always been diverse. We just haven't talked about it. And we sometimes pull out those negative aspects that we find to be quite different about us, but not talking about how we're still very similar to one another, and those uniqueness add to that. I've always been, I like history, I love architecture, I love those kind of things. So when I go in, when I visit new places, I look at the architecture of the cities, of the towns, trying to figure out like who were the settlers, what did they, you know, when you're in areas and you say, there were a lot of Germans here. And because of the style of the houses, my family's Swiss German. And so when you look at the ancestry or the way they built barns in Pennsylvania, or the way that roof slopes were made to prevent snow from accumulating, and they got that from where they came from, but we don't have as much snow as Switzerland does, but people built what they knew. And so it's very interesting to see the concepts and how just that part, those unique, diverse things about cultural groups, not let alone the kind of foods we eat, the holidays we celebrate, how we celebrate holidays, the kind of clothing we wear, the way our language is affected. I talk a lot about the English language, because English is really kind of like an accumulation of multiple languages. So even at the base, there's very, very, very few Celtic and Anglo-Saxon words left in English. Most, and literally they're very basic words too, but a good portion of our language base was really Germanic words, Germanic as well as, so Germanic would include Danish as well as German, but also Finnish and any Scandinavian type words. But we also would get French, because the nobility and clerics used French in their conversations as well as Latin. And so everyday people did not. So as English as a language developed, and we pulled in as we meet new people and new cultures, as English spread across the globe because of, you know, war, because of, we used to call it colonization, but it really was taking land from people. So yeah, we're gonna make a colony here, but the land didn't belong to us. But English spread like that. So instead of many ways of English just, here is English, is that we also began to add words as people were encompassed with conquerors that spoke English. And so we get new words all the time. And even now we keep adding them. We add, I don't know, several hundred words every year in English that may not have existed in our language 45, 50 years ago. The word computer, you know, 100 years ago, they didn't use that word. So it's really interesting that all those things come from a diversity of other cultures and persons. And yet we don't think about it, how it really has affected, it has really changed the way we think and how we embrace. I share this, Ben Franklin really hated the Germans and the Swiss. He did not like German and Swiss people. There was a quote, and I'm not going to get it right, but basically it said he believes that he called Germans and Swiss Palatine Boers, which were well, I call it Palatinate or the Palatinate part of Germany is where a lot of our immigrants from Germany came from, in the Swiss, because they would change our Anglo ways, our Anglo language, and our Anglo life. In reality, they did. Our foods, language, and our traditions would not be the same without that influence from Germanic groups. So that's just my little kind of, like I call it, a little sermonette about why diversity is really happening all the time and has happened for us. Culturally, across different regions of the United States, you will also see unique identifiers that came from earlier cultures that are maybe not found in other places. Celebrations of Mardi Gras in New Orleans is not like the celebrations of Mardi Gras in Boston, even though the tradition was celebrated predominantly by Roman Catholics. They were two different Roman Catholic groups, and therefore the Irish Roman Catholics are different than the French and Spanish Roman Catholics, and so their celebration was added to in a different way. So I just want to look at a couple definitions real quick, because when we talk about diversity, that's something that I want us to be kind of cognizant of. First one is unconscious bias. And in housing especially, this kind of plays itself because it's unconscious, we don't know it's happening. It is also known as implicit bias. It is all that inherent and learned stereotypes about people that people form without knowing it. We have formed these stereotypes in our head and don't even know. We might receive it from people. We might read it and it gets attached. We might see it one time and it gets attached to our head. Our brain is an excellent source of information. And it all comes from being kind of like the Library of Congress. So our brain absorbs lots of information, sights, smells, words, experiences, all of those things that we're told, things that we observe are in our head. Which is why sometimes we have that deja vu, like, I feel like we've done this before, or you will see something and an immediate thought will come to your head. You will see something that will remind you of somebody. You smell a perfume and it reminds you of somebody immediately. You didn't go sniff that flower and go, what does that remind me of? And then you think about it. It's like, I will smell a lilac and I will think of my front yard walking before we would walk to church for Easter Sunday. Because we always passed my grandmother's lilac bushes, which were in full bloom by Easter, and the smell of those lilacs. So that's a memory, a visual memory is attached to a smell memory as well. But unconscious bias does that. So we're told things about people, places, neighborhoods, vocations. And I'll talk a little bit more about this because we're going to talk specifically about unconscious bias and about some of the things that come into there. Microaggressions. So this happens, it's those daily negative slights, insults, and put downs. And some people it might be intentional, some people not intentional, but it's usually aimed at people in groups based on like race, gender, orientation, ethnicity. So the constant negative barrage information about a specific group. People that are in that group hear that all the time. Or someone in the office makes little comments all the time. Or you've been the victim of people making this and then someone on the outside says something similar that sits with you in the same way and it might cause you. So some of these microaggressions could cause us maybe to react. For some people, it may cause them to pull away or isolate. Some people, it may turn into a verbal altercation or even physical. They say that the cumulatory effect of microaggressions is like a PTSD event. Because if they've heard this over and over, it's like, think about being a child and being told the whole time, you're stupid, you're dumb, you're an idiot, you're fat, you're ugly, all of those negative slights of people, or people being picked on at school, that bullying. And it goes on until you wonder why someone punches somebody because they put up with this daily information and finally it came too much to do anymore. Many people have lived in relationships, whether it's family or marital relationships or love relationships, where they've put up being bullied by that person, and there may come a point that, boom. I just think about some of those early ones that in my life, like Lorena Bobbitt in Virginia, because I grew up in Virginia. You have people that turn and just take out the person. And may have been, their abuser, and they take it out because these daily microaggressions that are happening. Some are larger, some are smaller, but it continues daily. Intersectionality. So this is how our social categories are interconnected, like race, nationality, gender, orientation, and how as an individual or group, it might create a different kind of system of discrimination and disadvantage. So how we react to discrimination or disadvantage, or how we feel it coming at us. So a young Black female will feel a different form. They may sense or actually experience a different form of discrimination or disadvantage than, say, an older African-American male or African-American female even, because those overlapping other things. So we don't experience our life as just one thing. We experience it as a multitude of things. I don't look at life through just one lens. I look at through it through a multiplicity of lenses. I like this illustration to show how they overlap. So you may not have one thing in common, but you have the others in common, but it still creates a different color, you know, a different how I see things. We may think we have so much in common with our family, but in reality, if you have not lived 24/7 since the day you were born with your family, we are all still very different. We have experienced different things, heard different things, done different things. And so our intersectionality is a little bit different. And finally, discrimination. It's the act that treats one person unfairly, unequally over another in housing, employment, education, without really regard to ability and merit. So this is the legal definition. So it's really like when you're treated differently, not because of the fact that you earned it, you can afford it, or you deserve it. You were judged by the group you're part of or perceived to be a part of. And that is exactly what was happening in housing. So when we talk about redlining and we talk about, you know, how we actually created ways of keeping groups together and even keeping them in their place so they don't ever move out. So, you know, if you redline and keep, you know, schools and businesses and houses in one area, and only people in that area go to that. And so you will create a different level because there may not be any ability for growth, getting loans, improving properties, not being able to afford that. I know in Baltimore, as of course, you know, with what happened when you start developing certain neighborhoods, they would place school bus stops on one side of the street, not the other, so that kids on one side of the street could go to one school district, but the kids on the other side could not attend that district because there was not a school bus stop on that side. So even as simple as that, and wondering why things like forced busing was required because of the way housing was planned. And so therefore also how our shopping center is put in, what kind of stores in there? Do you have access to food? Is there access? So when we talk about even how diversity impacts our housing, I remember in my hometown, it's a small town, but it wasn't until I was maybe a senior in high school, and that was the 80s, 1980, did they actually put gutters and sidewalks in a neighborhood down near the railroad tracks because that's where all the poor people lived. The city didn't put them in, even though it was part of city property. But it was important for them to make sure the sidewalks and gutters were in place up in the middle class part of town. So it's interesting how that also shows you not only how people are treated differently, but also what ranking we put them in. And so wondering why, you know, there was sewage there, or why things weren't kept up, or why people didn't have money for chopping trees down if they were dead, etc. So a lot of those kind of issues bubble up. And so in some areas, they may not see it as necessarily discrimination, but it is disparate treatment. We're treating a group differently because of our perceptions about them. So I asked this question for us to always ruminate on. What do we really know about each other? Some of us, I mean, I have friends that tell me, oh, Keith, I know you like the back of my hand. No, they really don't. Because I sometimes will react one way and they'll say, oh, I never thought you'd think that. I never thought you'd like that. Because we don't really know lots about each other. And I like to do this little kind of activity. So I want us to think about ourselves as this big blue world. So, you know, if you see the world from space, we look like a big blue globe. So think about this is our entirety of our life, is this big blue circle. That little yellow circle represents everything people can see. And therefore what they think they know about what we can see about each other. So I'd love it if some people would pop in the chat, or if you want to unmute, you're okay to do that. Give me some things that if I looked at you, and I don't know you, but I look at you, what are some things I might be able to tell about you? Anybody have any idea? Just a couple. I won't hold on to you forever, but one or two. Okay, Cheryl. Okay, Cheryl, did you want to unmute? Okay, so I see Susan, Abiola. Okay, I'm Black, race. Okay, good. So race is one that, and I think, let me see if this is another.
Cheryl, you're unmuted, just FYI.
Okay, thanks. I had so much trouble finding the unmute button.
Okay.
I'm sorry, now I forgot my answer. What was your question?
About what can people tell about us by looking at us?
Oh, I'll just say that I'm female.
Okay, so so the two, gender, let me see, gender, okay, race, and true, and I would say are basic, because when it comes to race, sometimes people might be multiracial, or what we're seeing is maybe the dominant race that is presented before us. Because there are people that would say, I'm African American, but I'm also Puerto Rican, and I'm part Dominican, which are also ethnicities. But when you're saying, am I Hispanic and African background? So sometimes that in reality, are we all pretty mixed? Even though I fall in the Caucasian arena, when I did my my DNA, there is a small portion that is North African, because of some ancestry from the lower part of Europe. And of course, if your ancestors are from things like Italy, Greece, even the Ottoman Empire, like what would have been Turkey, all of those areas, there's been trade with Africa for centuries. Therefore, with trading comes people getting together, whether they become families, or whether it's, I always say, think of humans as just being, we have always kind of traded, traveled, warred, we have pillaged, we've plundered, we've raped, we've done all that stuff as humans. And therefore, along the way, we leave our DNA. And that DNA comes around. And so therefore, someone that we say, oh, you look like this. And you're like, but I'm not. And I still tell someone, you look Irish. I said, but I'm not Irish. So I'm Jewish. And it's really interesting. I said, well, Jewish is not necessarily a race, but it's, we have these conversations because we get these ideas of what people look like. Same thing with gender, because when we put in someone that might be non-binary, or persons that might be transgender, what we can do is making a visual assumption about it. What we perceive, there may be markers that we think, but those are good, because those are things that we talk about, visual stuff. Sometimes we're tricked, but sometimes, much like I've seen female impersonators who are male that I would not have ever thought that they were male. They identify as male, but they're doing impersonation, and I would have sworn they were female. It was so good. So sometimes visually we have to be aware of that, but there's some others. So like age, we're able to kind of assess a general age. Not, we do know the difference between 17 and 80. Between 41 and 44, we may not be able to tell that. Our height, our skin color. So even though we can change that at times, you could tan and bleach. But our basic colors of hair, eye, skin. Some disabilities you might be able to visually assess. If someone is wearing dark glasses with a cane, if someone is using a service animal, you may not know exactly what the disability is, but you are being able to say, I think they have some form of disability. I worked with persons with Down syndrome for a while, and I worked with persons with different forms of mental illness. So there are some markers that I may be able to recognize that someone that's never had an experience would not be able to recognize. And so there are some disabilities we may be able to, and weight. So these are just a couple. And so, and this is why sometimes we look at people and make this assumption, but we're not basing it on a lot of things we don't know. Right, it's very hard to tell depending on characteristics, because those characteristics can be put upon. I mean, we can change some. I could change height by wearing higher shoes, right? They used to tell me if I wore more dark colors than black, I would look skinnier. No, I just look I'm still heavy, but I just look darker in my clothes. So, but so once again, even with disabilities, if I could get in a wheelchair, it doesn't mean you know anything about how I got there or whether I should, or whether I really need it, or whether I'm just sitting in a wheelchair. It's about not making assumptions. And it is hard for humans not to make assumptions because our brain goes to it automatically. Our brain will assume who we feel is safe or not safe. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So those are some of the things that might come off if people look at us for this first time. And we'll see that people walk in the door and we'll assess their clothing style, how they're dressed, how they carry themselves, the way they look, the way they cut their hair, all of that kind of stuff. And it's quick, it's very quick. Now, the stuff that's found in the blue, and I'm going to put this on the outside, these are things that I'd never be able to tell about you. You would have to tell me about this in order for me to know. So how about one or two? What are some things that you would have to tell me about yourself in order for me to know it? And I've never met you before. So what are some things, big or small, that you would have to tell me? I can give you an example. If you would never know, you don't know me, but you don't know that I actually have a certificate degree in clowning from Barnum and Bailey Circus. So you wouldn't know that. Occupation, right, Susan, we don't know occupations. And once we find out that occupation, that's when we start to make assumptions about that occupation. Occupation, what else? Maybe one more. Come on, there are 27 of you out there. You at least have one more in you. Think about if I met you and I don't know anything else about you, what is something I would never be able to tell by looking at you? Right, include religion, disabilities, your educational level. Okay, good, you're all coming on in. Adoption, excellent. Natural hair color, that you're an avid cyclist. Oh my gosh, I sold my bike when I was like 18. Lord knows I didn't need to fall over anymore. I don't need to scar up my knees any more than they're scarred up. So wonderful, y'all, that was really great. So that's what I kind of get people to start thinking about. What is it that you wouldn't know when you look at me? People will say something to us and you go like, no, I don't do that. So just some of the others. We really sometimes don't know those ethnic backgrounds and some of our racial backgrounds. We don't know all of that, the racial or ethnic backgrounds. We may make guesses at it, doesn't mean that we know it. Where you're from, you're a percussionist. That's why you can discover sometimes you might be able to put together a choir and a band in groups. I discovered that I did a class for a state agency and I did that and they found out they had enough to actually form a choir or an orchestra. So many people played instruments and sang. So it's kind of cool. So racial and ethnic stuff, we don't know. We don't know people's health. Not only their health, but the people they may be caring for. We don't know what they may have been, what they may have had earlier, what may have happened to them, what they're currently dealing with in their health. We don't know that unless they tell us, or they experience an episode when they're with us, or work with us. And then you might know, but we may not know the depth of it. Educational level, as someone said. So it's not even just your educational level, but where you went to school, what did you major in? Was education important to your family? I look at my family and people make assumption thinking that I come from a quote middle-class white family and that we're all highly educated. I'm the first one in my family to go to college. And so I come from farm families and factory working families. And so they didn't get to go to college. They were not offered those opportunities, did not have the money for that opportunity. And so education sometimes is one of those things. And the assumptions we make about people when we say they are educated or non-educated. And what that means. Our family stuff, we don't know, even in real estate services, you may find out someone has X amount of children, but finding out the ages of children and what are their needs and necessary, like, do you need to have, if someone says, I need a backyard because I have 2 active children that are, constantly running around, And so this is something that, you know, as we develop that, but we don't know those things that happen in families. We don't know this. We don't really know. Or like your brothers and sisters, do you have siblings? Are you a blended family? Do you have, as we mentioned, do you have adoption in your family? Those kind of things. Are you merged, or are you a family that has lots of children or a few number of children? But we do that with assumptions when we talk about people that are, quote, young couples, and we'll say, oh, so you're good. When you plan to have children, you know, they're thinking they may never wanted children. And that's that big assumption. Or that people that may be same-sex couples are not going to want children. So we make these because of our culturalization of what we think about groups of people and what we think about the word family. Some of us have wonderful, warm feelings toward our families, and some do not. Some have been cast out of their families, and so their ideas about family are different. And when we use the term family, we have a family-like atmosphere, they go, then I'm not coming. Because their family concept was screaming and yelling and abusive. So therefore, they don't want that. So I sort of recognize that words mean things to people. But there are two that I want to put in. One is trauma. So we don't know, even if we know people well, we don't know all the trauma they have ever faced. They haven't told you everything that's happened to them. We don't even know the trauma that's faced their family. And we don't know the kind of injury that's happened to them. And even though they have survived, that trauma can reappear at different times, what we call re-traumatization. So we know that can appear and people sometimes can lead us to a re-trauma, to relive the trauma. Again, persons who have been sexually assaulted and then they go to work and someone is starting to sexually harass them can bring those feelings right back up, and that sense of fear and trauma can come right back up. My younger sister was shot in a robbery where she worked. And so the person that did it was a person that was heavily tattooed. His face was tattooed. And so she was, so whenever she now has vertigo and she has some emotional as well as mental trauma. So when we go out, I mean, she's fine when she's with me or a family member or friends, but if you leave her and then something happens, like for example, I'll go around the corner at Walmart to do something, to get something, and she turns talking to me, and there was a man there standing there with tattoos running up his neck, and she just froze and kind of panicked. And he was very friendly to her. He said, "Are you okay, ma'am? Are you all right?" She was just panicked because that was that initial, it just triggered something back. So we don't know that stuff. People may say something in joke, in jest, and someone's re-traumatized all over again because they thought it was funny and it's not funny. That's why I don't like watching those videos of people, you know, what they call the stupidest videos where people are doing things and they fall off trucks and they jump off roofs and all that kind of stuff. It's like, and I've had family members that have died in some of those ways. I don't need to be reminded of that. It's not funny to me to do that. But it's that kind of things come out and we don't know that kind of stuff. And finally, dictionaries. Now, the reason I put a dictionary, it's not the book. It's the book in your head. It's all of those words and phrases and both the slurs that people have used aimed at the group you fall in or even you. It's all of those words that have been used to kind of keep us in place. And it may have started in childhood. As adults, we might have picked up more, but it's these words. So we have words that we know that people have used to hurt people, you know, throughout time. So we know those specifically negative bad words. And they're also phrases. So sometimes we, you know, phrase like, why aren't you as fast as, smart as, funny as your sibling? That phrasing does that. And then you have words that don't seem to be bad, but it's when we use them, that word has been used in a negative way. I don't like the word husky. I was a chubby child. So by the time I had going to school and by the time we were starting to buy clothes, so the late 60s, early 70s, and my mother would have to take my slender brother and I and go to JCPenney, Sears, any of those to buy clothing. And they would have the husky department and the clerk would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, we don't have his size in this department. He's in the husky department at Point. So as an adult, that word husky triggers something that it sticks me. It's like a little arrow. It reminds me how I didn't fit in my family. That was one way I didn't fit. And that the choices I had were very limited, et cetera. So there are words that people might use even in housing. So sometimes we don't like to hear the words limited. Sometimes we may refer to like a family home, and it might be someone that may see themselves as a family, but they're single. But they see I'm going to be a family, and I might have my family members over, but I don't need a family. You're calling it a family home because it is more than one bedroom, I guess. But it's, you say this. So sometimes when we use descriptive words, we have to remember that words lay differently with people. Like, and also the word, I noticed that we, like, when I was looking for apartments, they would refer to wire shelves as dust-free shelves, and they stopped referring to things like butler pantries and taking words that are older. Most of us, I would dare say, have never had a butler in our life, but we know what that word means. It's the same thing with, I know what the word means, but I don't need to use it in that way. So I always say if someone uses a word and you use a word and they don't, it triggers something for them and they make that face. Sometimes people make that quick face. That's when you want to take the time to say, what did you hear me say? And if they tell you and say, oh, okay, I did not know that. I'm sorry, I did not know that. It's one of those things in housing that people have begun to learn to trigger about how we talk about where neighborhoods are. They're adjacent to. I had a real estate agent that when I was looking, I found a house online and said, could you set this up for me so I could go look at the house? And she said, oh, Keith, I like you too much. I can't show you that. I don't want to show you that house. That's just not a good neighborhood. Now, we all know that means steering. So instead, what she could have said was like, Keith, okay, fine. What I would suggest is you drive by there, go drive there in the morning one day, go by about midday, and go in the evening. Just drive through the neighborhood. And then if you want to see the house, let me know. So then I can make a decision as an adult. And so what happens is we have to be careful of our descriptors, not only housing, but of people. In that when people say it has a bohemian vibe, or it's an up and coming neighborhood, that says things to different people. And so words are important. And this is something that I always try to remind us, is that we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So persons that you may come in contact with, people that might be seeking housing, people that are seeking to, maybe if you're in real estate, if they're seeking to sell, they see the events and they see people around them the way they are, not the way you see them. So sometimes we have to share what I'm seeing or what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking, because they're going to start to assume that we do the same thing, which is why keeping silent is one of those things. If we keep silent, then people will generally assume that you agree with them because you didn't say, whoa, that's not true. But we do, I always think about that when someone looks at I like old houses, and I'll go like, oh, and I'm looking at a house, I'm going like, look at that trim. Isn't that a beautiful stained glass window? Oh, I like the peak of that roof. And that's a beautiful porch. The next person next to you is like, it's a dump. Can't you see the rot? Look at the rot under that porch. And that's going to need a new roof. And that stained glass window is not, it's going to be cold. It's not going to keep out the heat or the cold. Now you got to protect it because it might get broken. And now you think it's a valuable window. So I'm seeing the way things that I am, and they're seeing it the way they are. Sometimes you have to have the discussion so we can talk about the vision that we can see together. And I love watching the housing restoration shows and stuff to see how they talk to each other about, but if you do this might come out, and then later on they'll say, that did work out. So that we can work together on some things and it works out, but we have to be able to share with one another. That's a part of communication. What are you seeing, Keith? And what is it about it that you love? What is it about you that are kind of issues? So I've done that with the house I live in now, and the first house that my partner and I purchased was like, what do you love about it? What is it something you would change? So we have those discussions and say, so we're both on the same page. So I asked this, you know how I asked that question, what do we know about people? This is the other one. What does our language, both verbal and visual, say to other people? So I want us to keep that thinking in our head. What does that language say to other people? And even how we react to them. Are we outgoing? Are we very standoffish? One of the issues with COVID-19 has been that we've become less physical. We're more in person. So even on these kind of Zoom trainings and things like that, are people engaged? Are they looking at you? Are they paying attention? Because in person, I might be able to see that better. But when I'm teaching, I can't really see that in some ways because it'd be hard to see that. But in person, we may actually be able to exude more warmth. You know, who knows when we'll ever go back to shaking hands. And so some of those are ways that are how close we stand to someone and everything like that. But that is visual language that will tell us how we react. If someone constantly, if you touch them on the shoulder and they jerk back from you, it is telling you something. If you hug somebody and they stand still like a statue, they're telling you something, that their language, the language of their body is interacting with the language of your body, and they are telling you something, and we need to pay attention to them. So that language base, how we carry ourselves, words we say, and how we even use those phrases come from somewhere. We are not islands into ourselves. So where do we get our information? That's not only about people, but also about things like neighborhoods or occupations. Like, you know, people will talk about, I'm a state employee. They'll talk about state employees, but they'll also talk about real estate agents. They will also talk about lenders and mortgage lenders. So everybody has their image about. I've never had a real issue with real estate agents. I've never had an issue with mortgage lenders. I've always felt that it was fair, but that's my experience. And that's through my lens. Other people may not have. Like I said, all of our information is dumped in our head. It's all get ingrained in our head. So when we're born, who gives us that first real burst of information about almost everything? Who gives us that first burst of information that we will need? You'll pop that in the chat. What do you think? Who does it? Or you can unmute. Anybody have an idea? Great. Mom, our family. Good. Very good. Very good. It is parents, caregivers, people who are raising us. So when you're born, we don't know lots. We don't. Peers sometimes, yes. So depending on the age and when we're around them. So we do, when we're born, we're not born knowing a lot of stuff, but our family and even our social media. So, and I would throw peers, and peers are in the next one too, but we also, depending on if we have neighborhood children, if we're grown, we'll get information. But now, and I don't say unfortunately lightly, but younger persons are getting more and more information from social media that may be incorrect. It might be correct, but parts of it, or do they understand what they're seeing? The media that I saw growing up would have been either magazines or maybe the news, but also TV shows, movies, all past information about social groupings, about groups of people. You know, if we're looking at the way houses look and neighborhoods looked, depending on what the story was about, it would be passing some stereotypes about housing. And like many of, I think of all those sitcoms I watched early on, before really by the 70s, you start seeing more, but they were all predominantly white families. I did see Julia, which was a breakthrough as a single mother who was a professional, a nurse with a son. They did start showing things like single fathers with son, courtship of Eddie's father. So then you start seeing African-American families. Then you started saying there was crossovers between Sanford Son and Chico, when the man started seeing Hispanic, and he would say Chicano families. You start seeing them on television, but what happens is they're very like a snapshot in time. And so we start seeing and remembering this is what those kind of families are, and what are the houses they lived in, how do they live their life? And it gets in our head, it gets impressed in our head, and we still have that. So if person says, oh, it's a middle-class neighborhood, there's a picture that pops on our head. If we say a Black neighborhood, there's a picture that pops on head. If we say an inner city neighborhood, a picture pops on, versus a suburb. Those words all have images associated with it. But our family gives that. So our family does impact us greater than you think. Many people think, I get to be old, I'm not gonna do what my family says. I'm gonna tell you, you will, and I do this now and it scares me, when I repeat something, I say something to someone, I realize, oh God, that's what my mother and father said. Because it's embedded and sometimes it comes out of our mouth. So we do have family giving information. We have our friends, school, faith communities. They all give us information about groups of people. Our friends come from different families. Therefore, they got a different set of information. And it may be contradictory to what you were taught or what you observed. School, I mean, you have now teachers, principals, other adults around. You also have books and you have media. Interaction with kids that you didn't interact with before. If you didn't have kids in your neighborhood, and now you got, for me, I was in a quote town school, and then I started meeting kids that were from just into the county, some more rural, more, instead of, being in a town. And then by high school, I was having it like mostly rural. And so those impact of kids that came from farms and were up at 4 in.the morning working on the farm before they come to school, versus, then you have the families in my school that were upper class, and they were the children of professionals, where my father was more blue collar. So you have that experience of different levels of people. And then depending on what faith community you attended, or if you attended a faith community, you'd have gotten different information. And then of course, we all go to work. I started work at 15, and so I met people differently. So that work experience and with the kinds of people, how to do work. Because let's face it, when we talk about work, our family did not sit us down before we started a job and say, this is how you're supposed to behave at work. This is how you're supposed to buy a house. This is supposed to be how you save money. We don't all get that. And many times we don't get the information about other people and how we're supposed to react, or what's the best way to react. So work information comes in. And several of us have worked different jobs, and therefore we carry with us our work that we may have learned before. And sometimes it doesn't work in the current one, or it may be something we can adapt. As adults, we get adult social experiences. And therefore, not only those shopping or driving kind of experiences are experiencing people through other social media, but also things like trying to get a house, looking to rent at first, getting utilities. Those are all signs that, we are starting to separate from our childhood kind of being taken care of in some way. But those adult social experiences also influence how we see present day. So it might make me empathetic, trying to find an apartment I can afford. Can I afford electricity a month on my salary? Can this happen? What happens if? Do I have to have that? And the interaction with people that were assisting me. I had good ones, and one of the problems is that I know a part of my good experiences has to do with maybe two things. Well, I think one specifically, but one is I'm a very open person, tend to be very friendly person. Therefore, I might get more perks because of me being friendly, and we'll talk about that. But also, I know that a part of it comes from me being a white male. So sometimes I would have been given deference, or I might have been given the benefit of the doubt when I really didn't earn it and I really didn't have it. But it might have been something that was given to me, what we call white privilege. And there are other privileges too. I tell people there is Christian privilege in the United States, because our country has many as its roots, different religious groups. Most of them were different Christian denominations. So we have some benefit that we did not earn as being belonging to Christian belief or Christian faith. Sometimes there's age privilege, sometimes there, depending on what it is, sometimes there's gender privilege, socioeconomic privilege. Those are the kind of things that we may see in our adult social experiences, but with all of those privileges, many times a part of our unconsciousness, we don't know we're receiving it until we become aware. Oh, I know why I didn't get a ticket. You know, or but you know, we all know that. Sometimes people employ it on purpose, but sometimes it happens to us and we didn't realize it. It's unearned privilege. So that those kind of social experiences, that's why sometimes I may have positive ones and people that look different from me go like, oh no, it's always been bad. And then of course, life-changing events. And I save this for the last one because with life-changing events, these are things that happen to us that are so eventful. I don't know if you've ever seen the list of the events that cause the most stress in life. You know, death of a loved one, changing jobs, divorce, loss of home or change of home, all of those places. Those are all life-changing events. Trauma, sickness, all those can be life-changing events. And that kind of information may shift the way we think because it may color the way we think about people or places. So you may have someone that was pretty anti-Black, for example, and have an experience where, or a series of experiences where it's changed their thinking because, for example, say an African-American person saved their life from a car accident, or saved their life, or saved their child, or did something. It might shift their thinking, not only about that person specifically, but about the group as a whole, just because of it's so life-changing. And I put this as a circle because it is a cycle. What happens is that as we're born and we get all this information, we also then influence other generations. The next generation, we influence other people with this information because we share it. We're not given information and we don't sit on it. We don't sit on it and tie it down and lock it up. That information becomes a part of how we think and how we act and behave. And the housing, this will come out in many ways. If you have been kind of ingrained to think that a certain group of people, one, don't take care of housing, or they get all the benefits, or anything like that, if you're trying to work with a family that you perceive to fall within that, you might not give them your full attention, or you might show them the not so good places. So it may not have been a conscious decision to do that. It may have been a subconscious decision to do that. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about coming up. So into our head gets dumped information, misinformation. Many times misinformation is formulated and then reimagined and rethought out, and it becomes misinformation. Fear gets thrown in there because of that misinformation. Sometimes information causes us fear, but misinformation sows the seeds of fear in our head, and therefore bias. So our bias many times is, we think it's based on absolute truth, which I'll talk about when the bias is, but it's usually based on a perception. It may have been a one-time event, but it's not really a tested event. So it's not like it happened 850 times, it happened once. And I'll share a little story about my father. So bias is one of those things we don't like to claim. We will be the first person to say, I am not prejudiced. I do not have I'm not biased toward anybody. I love all people. How many of us believe that's true? How many people really believe they love everybody? No. We don't treat everybody. I hear people say, I treat everybody exactly the same. Well, you really can't. Those are things that our bias influences us on how we treat people and how we interact with them. Maybe subtle. And I'll talk about, some of them doesn't appear to be really bad, but it can have some other ramifications. So there are 6 types, and I want to talk about the 6 types. That'll help us understand that when we talk about bias, it's not about laying blame. Isn't about laying blame. These are things that are unconscious, things that have been added to our brain, things that have developed in our brain. And so The best thing about bias education or talking about these types is that we can recognize it. Otherwise, we're going to keep acting upon the same stuff. We don't think about it. But if we stop to realize, oh my gosh, this is what I'm doing, we may be more likely to attempt to change our behavior or change our thinking in some way. But it's not your fault. Some of this stuff's in here, not in here. It's just in there. So the types of bias, you have affinity bias, confirmation bias, heuristic bias, halo effect, groupthink, and perception bias. So I'm going to look at all 6 of these. They all have great names, but I think you'll recognize that you do all these sometime, or it has been done to you sometime. So let's look first at the affinity bias. This is when we like people who we think to be just like us or have some major commonalities. So affinity, it means that I have an affinity towards you. You like people that you think are like you. So it might be you've met them for the first time and have a conversation and you go like, we have so much in common. Boom. And it might be lots of reasons why you have an affinity bias. So the way this may show up, some of those examples, like someone from a place that you were raised. And so we might, if I grew up in a small town of Virginia, I meet somebody up here and they've asked me for help for something, I might be more likely to go above and beyond sometimes because they are from where I raised. Educated in the same institutions, same high school, same elementary school, same college, same graduate school, wherever. You know, you may go like, oh, we great. Oh, so you know, and a part of this about affinity bias is that it's becoming very central to us. Like we are making a connection with a person that shares something with us, and therefore we feel connected to the world in another way. We may feel connected, but this one's like, they know I'm connected because they're a part of my earlier life. We've become connected to our earlier life again. Now, for some people, they may have a negative reaction because if you say I'm from here and you go like, oh God, I got out of that town faster than I could do anything. But you still feel this like I'm connected to them. Another one may even be membership in the same faith community. And I've had these kind of things said to me like, you know, that we're from Virginia. Like I heard a man say, I only hire Virginians because I trust them. You know, like evidently you didn't know a lot of Virginians growing up. I mean, there are a lot of people I know I grew up in Virginia I wouldn't trust with anything, let alone walk my dog. So realizing that affinity also has another side to it, meaning that did I like everybody where I was raised? Did I like everybody in the same institutions that I attended? And did I like everybody in the same faith community? Am I even like some of those people? No. But for some reason, when we're away from it, we want to feel this tiny connectedness. And it's like an inner hope that we'll have more connected to it. And so affinity bias is not necessarily bad. But the problem is that when you don't have affinity, you don't have someone connected to someone, you may actually stop the process of conversation and think, I don't have anything in common with them. I will do exactly what's required. Versus with affinity, you will go above and beyond. So not that the person that you don't have affinity with is treated badly, they just don't get the same perks. They don't get the same. And sometimes people will perceive that as like, you went above and beyond for them, but not for me. Therefore, you don't like me. And they may assume that it's a part of another one, like another class, like a protected class. So people come to us sometimes and go like, they didn't like me. I didn't get this because of A, B, or C. And after doing some investigation, we realized that's not the case. Because there were other people that didn't, just because they liked that other person, but they didn't really have a connection with you. And that law doesn't protect that. So that's how affinity bias may be a negative in that other people may perceive it. Confirmation bias. This is when we have some element of information, even an opinion about a person. And then when you meet them, so you've never met them. When you meet them, your brain will unconsciously look for support for that opinion. This is why I try to tell people, don't tell like, oh, I'm going to go meet so-and-so. And they go, oh, you know, no, don't tell me anything about them because I've never met them before. And I don't want to come to that conclusion first. I taught elementary, middle school, and I got, please don't tell me about which kids you think are bad. because my brain, and I know this, my brain will start, well, every time I look at them, I'm going to think of what you said. And so this definitely will happen, even in dealing with housing, and we talk about how our bias affects us in providing housing services. So this is one. So you're told, after being told that persons in a specific group are bad drivers, even though you know that information is probably not true, whenever someone makes a bad driving maneuver, you may immediately think, I knew it, it was a blank driver, whatever group it was. Or it has to be. When I growing up, it was older adults or women. And so if someone's, swerving in the lane, or if someone is not has left the blinker on forever, we always do this, like, and realizing I am in my 50s and I've left my blinker on because I had the music on so loud that I forget that I didn't turn the blinker off or it didn't go off automatically. And then you're like, oh crap, it's been blinking on for 2 minutes, for 2 miles. But that's what your brain will do. They will assess it. They've been told something, and the first time they experience it, and they're looking for that confirmation. It's like being told someone is stupid. And you go like, well, I don't know them. When you meet them for the first time and they start talking, your brain will start looking to see if what they say, if it, like, instead of saying like, oh, that's an interesting thought, you're going like, where did you get that thought from? Where did you get that idea from? Instead of assuming that they had it in their head, you're assuming someone gave it to them because it was so smart. They couldn't have possibly come up with on their own. So your brain will start, and you'll automatically start talking in a different way. Or being told a specific neighborhood or area is not so good, and upon meeting someone from that area, you may respond with a "oh" or a question that leans more negative. And this happened when I moved to Baltimore. I was looking for an apartment that I could afford. I was working a job that was making not a lot until I went full time. So I could not afford, a lot of rent. And so I would look in different neighborhoods, but being not from Baltimore, I don't know neighborhoods. I don't know. I had to rank them as to how far it was from my office. I ranked it by that. Found a great one with a great price, but it was too far across the city. And so when I tell people, when I first moved to Baltimore, and this will tell you, this was like over 25 years ago, I moved into Hamden / Med, really was Medfield, but people called Hamden. And when I moved into Hamden, that was the original Hamden. So when I say, oh, I live in Hamden, they go, oh. And I don't understand that, oh. Or I'm sorry. Why do you live there? And so quickly I started doing other things. Like when someone say, where do you live? And I say Western Roland Park, Southern Medfield. It's so weird. Eastern Mount Washington. I will say anything. And they go, oh, okay. Because in an area that's based on neighborhoods, we have assumptions about neighborhoods. And so confirmation is if someone's told you stuff about a place and you don't know anything about it. I used to deliver stuff. My first job was delivering things in a certain neighborhood in Baltimore, and people are like, oh my, like I wasn't taught anything about it, and I just had no issue going in there. And then after a while, someone says, I can't believe that that's such a dangerous neighborhood. I said, really? I've been going there for 3 months and ain't nothing ever happened. I've never seen any danger there. Because my brain wasn't looking for that concept if it's dangerous, because no one ever told me that. But your brain will look for that kind of confirmation that something, so even something that appears to be positive, you may just question it even more. Now, heuristic bias, that's a great word, but it really means just stereotyping. So this is when we judge things according to superficial factors such as color, body size, body modifications, even gender and race, though those aren't really, superficial, but there are things we might be able to see. And in housing, it could be the type of housing, it could be the look of the streets, what are the other facilities. And so when we judge it all on that versus other things. And so it's stereotyping. So when we see neighborhoods, we go, oh, we judge the people that live in that neighborhood by the way that neighborhood looks, though we know nothing about the people that live in that neighborhood. been in neighborhoods that are like pristine yards and perfect gardens and stuff like that. And I may think, oh, they have money, or they must be retired because I ain't no way I have time to do that. Or they must have someone that really loves gardening. And then if you look at my yard, you go like, well, Keith, you haven't moved that log that fell out of that tree. And you're like, yeah, because I can't move it. It's too heavy. And I've got to figure out where to put it. And I got to try and figure out how to chop it up. And there are lots of things that play into decisions about housing or stuff like that. Or they should just fix this, and not realizing you don't know their money situation. You don't know their physical situation, their health. But it's how we stereotype even our housing and going like, oh, only certain kind of people live in those places. Only certain kind of people live. That's why, you know, when I moved to Baltimore City, their friends and family that panicked, going like, oh my God, you're going to die. You're moving to the city. But the fact is, all cities are diverse and varied in what their neighborhoods look like. And they have one image of all the neighborhoods of Baltimore versus the multitude of kind of neighborhoods in Baltimore. So some of the examples. Assuming that neighborhoods with a large number of African-American residents are all run down and dangerous. And that's some that I hear. Assuming that overweight people are lazy and just need to get up and exercise. That they can't take care of their housing. Assuming that all persons with disabilities cannot care for their homes. Some of the things we hear. You know, oh, and if you're in a wheelchair, you're not gonna be able to do anything. How do you know? How do you know? I may not be able to lift up sheets of sheetrock, but it doesn't mean that I can't take care of my home, or I don't have the ability to, I don't have people that can help me take care of my home. So that big assumption about that. We do that, the stereotyping about persons with disabilities, stereotyping about people that are seeking housing and the type of housing they're seeking, or whether they're using a voucher program, or whether they're, you know, they're working these kind of jobs, or, you know, they've got to have 4 people living together in order for the rent. And that's a real key now. How much rents are is like, I would never be able to afford. My house payment is cheaper than most of the rents around me by a lot. So I would never be able to afford to rent an apartment anymore. And I would need to rent a 3-bedroom apartment, which would take all my salary. But making these assumptions about people, and how, therefore, it's going to color the way we provide service. Because if we base it on stereotypes, now the thing about stereotypes is that we can break them because we meet people that are within that stereotyping or stereotype thinking, but they break it, they don't fit, right? So you have a person with a disability that is, you know, house is pristine, they've always kept their house up, they're not like, oh, it's a mess or whatever. And so when people say, well, you know, that people with disabilities, like, that's not true. There may be some, but that's not true. Not all. And I think it's the key of using all or every, or even the implied. I call it the implied all or every. When we use that in talking about places like neighborhoods or housing or people, we know we're going to be proved wrong sometime. And so we've got to make sure of that when we talk about, yes, there are some people that fit all types of stereotypes, but it doesn't mean all. But we're when we talk about it, we seem to be talking about it in every circumstance. Now, halo effect is attached to an earlier one, attached to our affinity. So not only do you like them, but you believe that they're a good person just because you like them. And it makes you overlook or dismiss some negative elements or behavior. So with the halo effect, there is an inverse called the horned effect. So therefore, if you don't like them, you think they're not a good person, or you think they're bad. And this plays itself out at work a lot. It plays it out in our groups of friends, or even extended friends. But even as we seek housing and as we provide housing and work with people in housing, we will do more for people because we like them and therefore think they're a good person. We may just go by the book, or even give less service to people if we don't think they're a good person because we don't like them. And once again, this is attached to our ego. I cannot believe that people I like would be bad because it would reflect upon me. So it's almost like my brain has to believe that if I like them, I've got to think they're good. But in reality, we've all experienced people in our life that that are not bad people, but they've done some things that might not be great. Doesn't mean you can't like them, or you may not like that part of them. We have family members like that. So some of these examples, when you have a renter that you have a lot in common and hit it off with them, you might overlook some deficiencies in their behavior because of it, such as letting them be late with the rent without an issue. So you like them, you think they're a great person, and they're going to be a little bit late, but you're not going to charge them, you're not going to assess them the fee, you're not going to say anything, they'll get it to you, they're good for it. But yet there are people that you don't know very well, or people that you don't really like because you don't like their personality. You're going to be on them. The rent is due on and before the 5th. Anytime after the 5th, you're assessed a 5%, fee. So that, right there, so somebody's getting differential treatment because of whether you like somebody or not. Now, I'm not saying that this may not be illegal. Legality has nothing to do with whether we like people, but I'm going to say that it could show forth, and therefore other people will feel like they are being treated differently, and they might bring a complaint because of it. So when someone makes a very derogatory statement or joke and someone defends them by saying, she didn't mean it, she was just joking, she's a great guy. I use the word guy on purpose because we use the word guy all the time to refer to women. And I just want to stand at that that's probably inappropriate, but I put that in here, but to remind people we say that as just an aside. And what's one of those words that sometimes trick us, that we say, hey guys, meaning everybody in the room, and there's like 75% women, instead of saying, hey gals, and let the men figure out that they're a part of gals. Yeah, she was just joking. So we hear that in sexual harassment comments and jokes and things like that. They're just joking. Now, group bias, groupthink bias, is when we think in group, act as the group thinks. It's when we lose our very individuality, identity, and thought by forcing ourselves and others to fit existing culture and maintaining status quo. There are always office rules, and there are always rules that apply to housing and stuff, and policies and procedures. That's different, unless those policies and procedures are oppressive or illegal. But it's when you come into a group, if you are working with a group of people and they say, we don't rock the boat. So if somebody's doing something, we don't say anything about it. And it's starting to force you to, and you may be the kind of person that says, look, if I see something bad going on, I'm going to tell somebody. And they're trying to force you to stay within that, not to rock the boat, or think the way we do, or treat people the way we treat everybody. So we're not going to be doing this. Is that a policy or procedure? No. Policy is we offer housing to everybody, but really we're only going to focus on this. And if somebody, but that's not right. What if I have someone that's out of that? They go like, we're just doing that. Now, some of the way groupthink bias works is like when people use team player, like we hear that a lot now in all offices and groups, team player. But instead of meaning, team player is we're all working toward a common goal. We're trying to get people in housing, or we're trying to get people the best service. We're trying to make sure that we're, making sure our neighborhoods are becoming, vital and healthy neighborhoods or whatever. But we using it for that reason. But when you use team player to make sure people fall in line, that's an incorrect use of team player. That is now a dictatorship, and they are your subjects. So not a team. A team implies that you're going to work together for a common goal that we're all a part of. Once again, as I mentioned, as a coworker being pressured to go along with jokes such as not to rock the boat, like laughing at inappropriate jokes, behavior, etc. Or when you're hiring. So this might be you feel that you need to choose a candidate who's most likely to fit the culture that exists rather than a candidate who's most qualified for the position. So you may say to a candidate, we just don't think you'll fit here. This happens in housing all the time. We think, oh, you're not going to fit in this neighborhood. When people say, I don't think you'll be happy here, I don't think you will fit here. When it comes to housing, let me decide that. Let me make that decision for that. And once again, all of these things are going on, and we don't know what's going on sometimes in our head. And finally, perception bias. This is what we call prejudice. It's thinking or perceiving something is absolutely true of a specific group of people, making it impossible to remain objective about the individual. So we get caught up on something specific, whether it's their race, their ethnicity, their gender, sexual orientation. And so we're seeing where people say, I will absolutely not work with this group, or I will absolutely not sell houses to these people. I will not do that. And that's the way our neighborhoods got segregated the way it did. It was legally enforced that we do not do that. You're not getting loans in those areas. You are not going to be sold houses in there. It is illegal. Baltimore was the epicenter of that. When the law was passed, I think it was like 1904, that if your street was predominantly Black, you could only sell to Black people. If your street was predominantly white, you could only sell to white people. So our Baltimore city went from looking like a spotted leopard of people living all next to each other as like, all over the place, to look more like a zebra. And we see it today. We still see it today. And there may be some people crossing over, but there's still a lot of zebra stripes going on in Baltimore City, as in other cities too as well. But it all is about how prejudice about groups of people and our ideas about other people. So some of the perception bias. Believing that no matter the physical proof or experience of others, women are by nature more nurturing than men. Believing that people who are white or perceived to be white are more likely to take care of their home. So therefore, you're just going to play into whether I'm going to be able to show you houses in that neighborhood because all of these houses, like they're kept up, or whether I can just show you houses wherever, those kind of things. Or believing that gay men are all feminine. So these are all those perception bias. So therefore, if gay men are feminine, they are going to want certain kinds of housing, need certain things. We have perceptions about everybody. And I'm sure you've all run into them somewhere in our life. We've perpetuated them. We've been the victim of them. So perception bias has been aimed at all of us in some way or shape or form. So what can we do? Number one is like focusing on culturally adding things, not fitting them. So what happens, we try to make people fit into this idea about, but it's really about adding it to our culture. Focus on an individual, not the group. Focus on what people need. Focus on that individual and what that individual needs, what that individual family needs, if that's what you're working with. Share your stories. This is where sometimes people learn more about us by talking about our lives and how we've experienced some of the things, how we develop empathy, but note how we may differ, but also celebrate those similarities. We'll find that we have a lot more in common with people that we thought we'd never have in common with them. Another one is something that people use a lot is their gut feeling. I feel like in my gut. Explore them. That means that, especially about people, whether it's positive or negative, it might be a positive gut feeling. But where do you think I'm getting that from? Think about, where am I getting that from? It could be that they remind you of someone that you liked. Could be they remind you of someone you didn't like or didn't trust. So your gut feeling is about somebody else, but it's not about that individual that's standing right before you. So check it out, because sometimes those gut feelings, are really based on earlier experiences with people that might not be true this time. And as I mentioned about having those first thoughts about groups of people, when one of those first thoughts always appear in your head, reach for that second thought. So if someone's cutting you off, don't go with that first thought like, oh, they're doing this on purpose, or I'm going to be late for work. But they don't know you're late for work. Or I knew what it looked like. It looks like a woman, therefore it's got to be. No, put that aside and say, oh, what they're doing is rude. Because what happens, we go for the individual versus really the behavior. Really, we should focus on the behavior, not the individual. So we want to talk about how we improve these. Well, first, we have to learn more about ourselves. So think about where you got ideas about different groups of people. Think about your background, some of those prejudices and biases. Think about that. And where did I learn this about different groups? We want to learn about different groups and understanding their needs and their individual families through firsthand interaction. It's not learned by reading a book about somebody or watching a movie about them. And that's where we get some of our stereotypes from. We want to interact with a person individually or a small group individually. try to see the experience through other people's eyes, and that's use empathy. We've all experienced on having to find a place to live. We've all experienced being treated differently. We've all probably experienced that in some way. So tap into that feeling when someone's beginning to feel anxious about housing and recognizing that I'm going to try and help you through this, and how difficult it can be. Don't multitask when communicating, especially if you're working in the area of housing with people that might have language barriers, or I said with a different dialect or accent, and there may actually be like a language itself. So multitasking disrupts the process because you're not thinking about that one person, you're doing other things. And people, one, will know that you're not paying attention to them, and two, that you're not interested in paying attention to them. And you're only gonna do about 30 to 50% of what you said you're doing because you're gonna lose a lot of it. In dealing with language issues, always make that extra effort to understand. If you're working with someone over time, you'll begin to understand how they use letters, and it's a different language, of course, and you don't know it. That's not going to be helpful. But if dialects or accents, accent is from a person from another country. Dialect is within that language. So a dialect of English would be Southern, or Tidewater for Virginia. You might have Bostonian, you might have Chicago. So they're all dialects of an area. But your ears will pick them up, and you'll begin to, the more time you spend with the person, the more likely you are to understand them more. We see that in our own families and stuff. Finally, constantly challenge your assumptions about people, about what they need. The way to find that out is to ask them. You know, don't assume what they need. We think, I know what you want. Not necessarily. Check your language. So we talk about the importance of, like, think of that impact on others, the words that we use and how it might impact them differently. And if someone tells you, I don't like that word, then ask them, what is a good word that you think I should use? I am sorry about that. I didn't realize that. Tell me. So you engage them in a communication process so that you actually learn from each other, and the person sees that you really are understanding and that you do want to learn. That people have a different idea once we start that process versus like you going like, okay, then it says right there, you could care less. And so that says more about you than it does about the process. Don't minimize the other person's problems, issues, or experiences. I've worked with people with disabilities trying to find housing and knowing that they've experienced this over and over sometimes. And and you're like, look, it'll be okay. Well, it'll work out. And you're like, but that doesn't help people who are in a panic mode. So don't minimize it, realizing they're experiencing what they're experiencing. Treat others as adults with respect and dignity. And if you want respect, you must give it as well. And this is something that I fully believe is that, we say, oh, I command respect. Well, we grant it. We give it to you because of the way you treat us. And so that's how respect is actually given. And because that's why respect is so important, is because I grant it to you because of my perception about you and what you've done with me. Keep confidential, which needs to remain so. As you know, in most transactions, there's always issues around confidentiality. So making sure that whatever needs to remain so. There's some things that you don't have. Someone tells you, please don't tell me about this. If it's something illegal, of course, you're going to have to deal with it. You need to tell them. If it's illegal, I have to deal with it. If it's not illegal, if you're telling me something that is very personal, yes, I can be confidential about that. But really recognize that in all of those differences that we perceive, we still have lots of similarities. They are scads of similarities. And we've all have some similar needs, and we all have some similar desires, and focusing on those and making sure people have the best experience. And that means working with, there's sometimes things that we can't make it exactly right, or sometimes there are things that we can't fix, but we have to, in making that effort to do the best that we can, we'll see that we've experienced that in the same way as well. Okay, do you all have any questions? I'm going to stop share. I see there's a question here. It's a question, but I don't know what it went to. And it was from an anonymous attendee.
I think this person is asking if this extends to HOAs, like homeowners associations.
Oh, you mean for discrimination?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
it does.
Okay.
Yes, it's like it's like condo boards. Yes. So if there's, for example, if you're in a neighborhood and they are not providing access to a pool,
Mhm.
as a pool, a playground, and there is no egress, like there are no ramps, there is no egress for any of this, yes, it can be called in on that. We can be called in on that.
Yeah.
Because we want to make sure people have equal access to use of your neighborhood. So your individual house, that's up to you. If you bought your house, that's up to you. But if it is communal space like a party room, if it's a pool, if it's, and people will always, we just had this discussion with someone going like, and I was like, why would people in a wheelchair need a pool? And I go, does it matter? What does that matter? And it's like, do you know people in wheelchairs have people that aren't in wheelchairs with them? They may be taking care of their grandkids. What about maybe they can get out, maybe they need to be in some water therapy and the pool is really good to get down in it. Lots of things, you know, just think outside that box. But what happens is people just automatically just go like, well, I know everybody and I know people in wheelchairs and they don't ever use a pool. That's that part of that bias. I know people in wheelchairs, they don't use pools. Well, I don't use a pool and I'm not in a wheelchair. So what does that say about me? But lots of people that look like me use pools. So it's really when we talk about bias, how stuff that crops up immediately in our head and then we act upon it versus thinking about what we're doing and saying. Especially when it comes for housing for, I'm going to tell you that we get a lot of calls and I'm an educator and I get calls from people that I cannot do anything for. I am not an investigator. I'm not the intake, but I point them in that direction, but they will still ask me about these things. I'm going like, oh my gosh, this is still happening. People are still refusing you to put grab bars in a bathroom. Because I've been immersed in it and I hear it and see it all the time, that I'm starting to make my assumptions that people all know it. And it's just common sense, but it's not common sense. It's not common sense when people are renting, if they say they're going to rent a house and they're going to rent out their old home and buy a new one, and not realizing there's a lot of things you have to do and be in compliance with law.
Yeah.
And we want to provide, and once again, that bias of liking someone, there may be people that a renter you have that you really like, and they have a form of disability, and you're really willing to bend over and do anything for them because you like them and you want them to be home and feel this is home. But other people that you may have rented to may have developed a disability or had one and you really didn't like them and you were like, by the book, if you don't do this by this point, you're out of here.
Right.
That internal bias working on us all the time.
So we have another question. I'm just going to go ahead and read this off, Keith. Regarding rental/purchase of a house and discrimination, what is the status of restrictive covenants and deeds in the state of Maryland, especially those limiting the rental, sale, occupation, or use of a property by no person of any race other than the Caucasian race?
That's a big question. That is a very large, big question.
It's very specific, yes.
Okay. I would say, one, restrictive covenants are illegal.
Mm-hmm.
I have friends that live in neighborhoods that still have them on their deeds and they need to be removed. Like, even though they ignore, they've been marked through.
Right.
Deeds have to be restructured. They need to be redone. So if there's any, especially when it comes to race, that is illegal. Now,
yeah.
You have the Mrs. Murphy's exemption, but you have to live in the house, and it is a very limited in the number of places, that limits it. But when it comes to restrictive covenants in neighborhoods, in apartment buildings, in condos, they're illegal.
Right.
And they've been around for a long time. And And that's why that was that beginning. That was why, like, if you live in the Baltimore area, that's why the neighborhoods that run up north, when you run up through Charles Street, up through Roland Park, and you run up, you know, Guilford, Roland Park, all the way to Homewood, and it keeps getting up. And you start to see how institutions move that way, and how those streets look, and how those roads are taken care of. All of those are very different than if you go to maybe East Baltimore or West Baltimore. And so housing and implications about housing, you know, it has lots of implications for food, schools, transportation. It really does. Access to anything, you know, it's really important. Now, do we have, oh, I'll see some chat.
So I put your email address in there, but also Abiola linked to an article. So I mean, yes, this is illegal, Abiola. So I'm not sure, like, I would have to read this article, obviously. But Keith is, you know, correct in saying that, you know, there's still that language in some of the deeds, but it's not, it cannot be enforced legally.
Right.
So I think that it's such that my understanding is that I don't know what would be involved with removing it from a deed. My understanding is that legally, for whatever reason it might be, it is challenging to do so, and I believe it's related to the land in the neighborhood. There's a book that I read about this. I'm trying to recall now, specifically about Baltimore, because this is the case in a few neighborhoods in Baltimore City.
Not in my backyard. I mean, not in my neighborhood. Is that it? Not in my neighborhood? Or The Color of Law?
I think it was The Color of Law. Yeah.
And a part of that is that what they may do is, like, I've had friends and like they're really Roland Park, lower Roland Park near the university. And so I think it has been rewritten, but the original deed has been retained as maybe as a historical document. You know, so historically, this is what it looked like, but the new document does not have that restrictive covenant on it because it cannot be enforced. And I'd say if it can't be enforced, it needs to be removed, because think about a person reading it, they get their deed and look down there and they're part of the group that they're, you know, it was like no persons, no of African descent, Hebraic descent, no Jews. And in some, there was no Catholic or Papist religious tradition. Even they use them in those kind of either very technical words, Hebraic, instead of saying Jewish, but they would say Papist, which is a negative, one of those slurs toward people who are Catholic. So they were still in there, and it really shows how we were limiting, like, we don't want our neighborhood, and even those, if you look at the neighborhoods, you know, Hamden Medfield's right next to Roland Park and Guilford and stuff. It was years before you would see, like, if they weren't Protestant churches, you would not, and there were no synagogues and there was no Catholic church. So you could see that, you know, where the churches were, like for the mill workers, maybe in Baltimore, there were a lot of Irish, Italian mill workers. So therefore their neighborhoods were near it. Therefore their neighborhoods had Catholic churches if they were Catholic. But owners may not have been of that. And so they may have been Episcopalian or Baptist or Methodist or Lutheran. And so you'll see, it's very interesting when you see really even those kind of major institutions, what health, you know, what hospitals are there, what stores were there, what kind of stores. So it's really interesting how housing really it impacts everybody's life and every part of your life. So this, I think that we will be constantly, I think that'll be something coming up. Instead, I don't know if they could ever come up with a blanket way of correcting all of the deeds. You know, I think that would be more difficult, you know, to correct, because we don't know. Some people's families they've been in the same house for 120 years. And until they sell it, we're not going to see that deed. So it's going to be interesting. And I noticed there was one, we're currently experiencing illegal evictions from a property in Dundalk. They're primarily evicting population we support in the program. Yeah, I mean, this scary part about COVID is that now the people that were already struggling to being able to keep up with rent is now they're behind on it. So now this becomes a really good reason to get rid of them. Now, what can happen if they file a complaint, say, I think I'm being evicted because of my disability status, for example. If we go in and say, we need to see everybody that you're evicting, and we need to see everybody you're allowing to stay, and we need to see all their payment records and everything. And if you note a pattern, if you see a pattern that only people with disabilities are getting evicted versus people who are not disabled, and they're still behind, okay, so why are you letting people that are not disabled still be behind, but you're not evicting them? Some of it might be that conscious bias. I like certain ones, and so I'm not going to evict them because I like them and I know they'll pay it back. Well, there are a lot of people in our life that we like, but we know they'll never pay us back. I have family members. I know I'm not going to see that money again. I know that, but I still like them. And so that may be what's happening too. And so, but I always say, if there's even a perception, we can always make sure, talking to our intake department and talking with someone there is the one that you'd want to deal with.
Right. And FYI, just for people who are attending, MCCR is the state agency that is tasked with enforcing source of income. So if there are cases in which you are working with, say, somebody who's a voucher holder and they're being told or that they can't rent somewhere because of their voucher as their source of income, then that is a situation that has to be reported to the MCCR. So, and it is illegal to deny somebody based on them having a voucher as their method of payment. It's a little bit different if it's a situation where the housing authority believes that the property does not meet their rent reasonableness criteria. That is not the same situation as somebody using a voucher to rent at private housing. So just
like for example, if they say, I want to live here and the rent is normally $1,600 and I want to rent a 3-bedroom for $2,400.
Right.
It says we can only pay up to this. We can pay up to, let's just make a number, $800. You're going to have to cover the other $1,600, cover the other $1,600. And it's not like but you got to still be able to afford whatever portion you're paying.
Right. Right.
And so it is saying, like, yes, now all housing is available, but in reality, only we have other criteria we have to fit.
Right.
We do. And it's like with service animals and things like that, and someone saying, well, I have to have my 24 cats because they are my comfort animals. That is probably not, that's also a health department issue. So you may not be able to do that. So that's what the thing with housing, it is so much more complicated than employment. Housing is so complicated because there's so many and every case is looked on its face and investigated as an individual case. We can look to other cases and, well, we did negotiate this for that one, but it may not work in this situation. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Can I ask one last question?
Sure.
There was a situation in my prior employment where the person was not in a wheelchair first, but they eventually had to get into a wheelchair, and the owner did not want to put in a ramp for the person. And we got the form. No, I'm in his home.
Okay, home, okay.
Yeah. So we got the form from their medical doctor saying the medical need, and we filled out the reasonable accommodation, and we submitted all of that, but they said they didn't want to incur the expense. That would be expensive. So they said if our company or if the person would pay for the ramp, they would get it put in. Who would we contact, like, if that ever happens in the future?
Well, that would be our office bed modification or accommodation. Now, it sounds like that was a modification, like and if it's a modification that others could use, like grab bars, wide doors. Usually with modification, it's at the owner's expense. I mean, at the renter's expense, usually. Sometimes it may be negotiated that ramp could be useful to lots of other people. If it's directly into their apartment, it might be they're going to have to pay for it. If it's an accommodation, the person requesting it cannot incur any debt. So you can't say, "Oh, we'll do the accommodation if you give us $200." No, if someone asks for accommodation, they need to be accommodated.
Yeah, so Diane Dressler put in the chat, which is true. Not all owners are responsible for paying for modifications. Only those with federal funding must pay for the tenant's modification.
Right.
If it's considered an expense that they, also in addition, if it's, create some kind of undue financial burden on the housing provider, they can come back and try to negotiate with the person to, provide something else. But I would say, in the properties where we have our 811 and Weinberg units, the owner does have to provide those adaptations because those projects receive federal funding. So
right.
It often surprises people that is the case, that they're actually responsible for paying for modifications in private housing, but that is true.
And they have to put it back. If they leave, they have to put it back to what it was left, unless it was something anybody can use. Like
exactly.
Like if you rip out the hand grips in a bathroom, you're going to damage the porcelain or the shower. So lots of people can use those. I could use wider doors in my house.
Right.
I bump into those door frames all the time carrying something. So therefore, if you leave it as a wider door, a lot more people, it's more accessible. Therefore, it doesn't have to be corrected. But if you have to lower, kitchen cabinets for someone in a wheelchair, you have to put those cabinets back up at your expense.
Right.
Back up. Not sure about with federal for those kind of things, like, changing of cabinets and stuff. But if if you're receiving federal funds, you have to replace the cabinets up or back or.
It should be something that the property does for a person who needs that as a modification, as long as it's not, again, like an undue administrative financial burden on the property provider. Right. And normally, I mean, so for people in our programs, it's common for people to request RMs, reasonable modifications, for their disabilities if the unit does not meet their needs fully, because we don't have entirely accessible units all the time. It just depends on what the unit mix is in the property.
Right. And it's if you're using older buildings that are really, even the units are not constructed with that in mind.
Right.
The way rooms are constructed, the way doors are put on. And I've been in apartments going like, there is absolutely no way. I didn't, without tearing all the walls down and starting all over. It's sometimes beautiful old buildings, which I love, but like they're, I don't know how people would know to get out of if there's an elevator, how to get out of the elevator and then make the turn
right
to the door, which is in a little alcove, and push the door, which weighs about 150 pounds. Yeah. I mean, those things that we have, and that's why I tell people, if you've never had to experience it or have somebody in your life experience it, walk through, pretend. I used to have an old wheelchair that I would put people in and say, okay, you try to get up. You try to get in the bathroom. Try to get in the bathroom without getting out of your chair. Try to figure out how to use the stall, how to wash your hands. Figure out how to make the maneuver from that door out and then back into the hallway at a sharp turn to go right back in your office. How?
Right.
And it's eye-opening when people have not experienced that or trying to figure out where to park or, who do I where's the ramp or where is the curb cut? And that's why, our world is really, truly diverse. But what I think is really wonderful is like, I grew up in a town that I knew we had a woman in a wheelchair in school with me. We only had one child in a wheelchair. And so I got to experience Lynn. But the reality is I knew there were people in town, but they never left their homes. They never came off the porch.
Yeah.
There are no sidewalk curb cuts. There's no access to other, it wasn't. You had to hope that there was a, if someone was in a wheelchair, if a bus would come get you, and if it had the lift.
Mm-hmm.
People picked out of the wheelchair, put in the seat, their wheelchair put in the back, and then reversed wherever you went. And for us, and we see in a positive way, we see that now disabilities are in the public and people see them every day, and people begin to experience their life too. And sometimes the difficulty our culture throws at them, or difficulty our actual physical environment throws at them. And it makes them more aware, because we're living longer. There is a theory that we could live to be 150. Humans can live to be 150. And I'm just saying that means I'd have to work till I was 120. And so I am tired at 59. So I don't think I'd make it to 120. So just saying. But as we live longer, we will be developing disabilities. Just as our bodies age, this is the natural progression in our bodies sometimes, that we develop difficulties in hearing, breathing, walking, all of those kind of things. And it would be lovely if our world was already set for everybody, if it was already set for us when we got there.
Right.
Everything was corrected.
Yeah.
We're playing catch up for the last, for us, 400 or 500 years in the United States. We're playing catch up. You know, other countries, thousands of years, trying to play catch up on facilities and buildings and all of that stuff. So, but we try, and I think that's the real key, is as people continue to try and helping correct ideas and think outside their boxes that have been created in their head.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're just about at time. Lakeisha, would you like to close us off?
Absolutely. So thank you, Keith. This was a lot of great and helpful information. Thank you all for joining, and we hope that you all will be able to join us next Thursday. We'll be presenting on trauma-informed care, as well as the Violence Against Women Act. So we hope to see you then. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all very much. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.